How many are familiar with For Dummies books? It's not anything new to anybody, I hope. So I'm not calling anybody a dummy, okay? So what are these books about? When you pick up a For Dummies book, why do you pick up such a book? Because you want to learn something to get a sort of a working knowledge of a topic? Does reading a For Dummies book make you an expert? No. But it probably gives you enough information to have a conversation or possibly even start a new project or hobby, right? So, for example, you would never find like a jet engine repair for dummies. Something you have to be an expert at before you would try is to repair a jet engine. No one's going to let you try and repair a jet engine after reading a jet engine for dummies repair book. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so when we say God's story for dummies, we're hoping to give followers of Jesus just a kind of a way to have a conversation with people about Jesus and how he fits into God's story. Because I think sometimes as followers of Jesus, we have this idea that we either have to have a degree in theology or we have to have a degree in something called apologetics, which is a way to defend our faith in order to talk to anybody about our faith. So most of us, if we're honest, just don't. So our hope in this series is to help you have a working knowledge of God's story and the role Jesus plays in the story, often referred to as the gospel. So if I were to ask you if you could explain the gospel to somebody in a short conversation, say an elevator ride, could you? Everybody who went to Bible school is kind of nodding their head. But I think for the rest of us, sometimes we pause for a minute. Now, we probably could, if pushed, but it might not come out the way we want because we maybe haven't thought about it too much before, or we would get overwhelmed by we would start thinking about all the times we went to Sunday school and all the stories we learned and which ones do we tell, which ones don't we tell. So what we're trying to help you with here is to be able to explain the gospel, to show how Jesus' death and resurrection is actually good news, which is what gospel means, and where it fits in God's story. So we're going to be looking at this for the next few weeks, so hopefully you'll find this series helpful. So last time we were together, we reviewed what makes news good news. So N.T. Wright in his book, Simply Good News, says that something has to have happened so that something, therefore, is going to happen, and the way things are different as a result. So if we look at our list here, we have to ask ourselves what has happened. We have to understand the context and how what has happened is either improving the situation or a solution to a problem. And then we have to think about how what the solution actually is, what will happen because of what happened, and then how things will be different while we're waiting for the something to happen because of what has happened. Everybody with me? Good. Making sure I got it straight. Okay. So in God's story, what is the thing that happened that will bring good news in the future, the solution to the problem? Yeah, it's the Sunday school answer. It's Jesus, yeah. Easter, we just talked about Jesus' death and resurrection. How it was all part of God's rescue plan to have a restored relationship with humans. And the resurrection is an important cornerstone to our faith. Jesus overcame death, which was a consequence of our separation from God. He proved that by rising from the dead. And then the Apostle Paul in Romans 8 says that we have the same power that raised Jesus is living in us now. So that's the news. And I think that we as followers of Jesus get sometimes so focused on this part of the story that we sometimes forget it's only the pivotal part in God's larger epic story. So it's not possible to understand how Jesus dying and coming back to life is the pivotal part in God's story and not just some one-time miracle unless we connect it to the other parts of the story. I think at Easter we talked about Lord of the Rings. So we have to understand that the pivotal point in the story is where the outcome of the story is decided. So in the Lord of the Rings, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, when the ring falls into the lava and is destroyed, the outcome is decided in the story. Everything that happens after that is because of, this is the part that is the news. That's something that has happened. Okay? But if we only saw just those few minutes of the story, like some of us do when we're checking things out, we look on YouTube to see, and they'll show us a clip. And sometimes we decide whether we want to see something or read something based on that clip, but it doesn't really give us the whole story. So how often, as followers of Jesus, do we only talk about Jesus' death and resurrection and expect people to want to follow Jesus? It is the pivotal point in the story that decides how the story is going to end, but to make sense of it, to see how it's good news, we have to know the whole story. In particular, we have to know the context. And what I mean by that is we have to know the circumstances in which Jesus' death and resurrection would be perceived as good news or a solution to a problem. So for that, we have to go back to the very beginning of the Bible. Genesis chapter 1. And if you want to look it up on your phones, we're going to read that together. I've asked Myla to read chapter 1 for us. We're going to read Genesis 1, verses 1 to 31 from the NLT. Or did you pick something else? She picked something else. She'll tell us then.
I picked the Message because I love the poetry of it. So, of course, you can look at it in whatever translation you like. Genesis 1. First this, God created the heavens and the earth, all you see and all you don't see. Earth was a soup of nothingness, a bottomless emptiness, an inky blackness. God's spirit brooded like a bird above the watery abyss. God spoke, light, and light appeared. God saw that light was good and separated light from dark. God named the light day, and he named the dark night. It was evening, it was morning, day 1. God spoke, sky, in the middle of the waters, separate water from water. God made sky. He separated the water under sky from the water above sky, and there it was. He named sky the heavens. It was evening, it was morning, day 2. God spoke, separate water beneath heaven, gather into one place, land, appear, and there it was. God named the land earth. He named the pooled water ocean. He saw that it was good. God spoke, earth, green up, grow all varieties of seed-bearing plants, every sort of fruit-bearing tree. And there it was. Earth produced green, seed-bearing plants, all varieties, and fruit-bearing trees of all sorts. God saw that it was good. It was evening, it was morning, day 3. God spoke, lights, come out, shine in the heaven sky, separate day from night, mark seasons and days and years, lights in heaven sky to give light to earth, and there it was. God made 2 big lights, the larger to take charge of day, the smaller to be in charge of night, and he made the stars. God placed them in the heavenly sky to light up earth and oversee day and night, to separate light and dark. God saw that it was good. It was evening, it was morning, day 4. God spoke, swarm ocean with fish and all sea life. Birds fly through the sky over earth. God created the huge whales, all the swarm of life in the waters, and every kind of species of flying birds. God saw that it was good. God blessed them. Prosper, reproduce, fill ocean, birds, reproduce on earth. It was evening, it was morning, day 5. God spoke, earth, generate life, every sort and kind, cattle and reptiles and wild animals, all kinds. And there it was, wild animals of every kind, cattle of all kinds, every sort of reptile and bug. God saw that it was good. God spoke, "Let us make human beings in our image, make them reflecting our nature so they can be responsible for the fish in the sea, the birds in the air, the cattle, and yes, earth itself, and every animal that moves on the face of earth." God created human beings. He created them God-like, reflecting God's nature. He created them male and female. God blessed them. Prosper, reproduce, fill the earth, take charge. Be responsible for fish in the sea and birds in the air, for every living thing that moves on the face of earth. Then God said, "I've given you every sort of seed-bearing plant on earth and every kind of fruit-bearing tree, given them to you for food. To all animals and all birds, everything that moves and breathes, I give whatever grows out of the ground for food." And there it was. God looked over everything he had made. It was so good, so very good. It was evening, it was morning, day 6.
Thank you, Mala. So there you go, everything you need to know about creation. Except, well, if you're a follower of Jesus, depending on the tradition you grew up in, there's a lot of, I'll use the word controversy, that is maybe too strong a word, or in some circles not strong enough, about how Genesis chapter 1, the first page of the Bible, is interpreted. Is it literally 6 days or not? How much time elapsed? Why did God do it? And then we have the other extreme. We have what I'm calling the new atheists. They would have you believe that no one in their right mind would believe God is creator. There's no such thing as intelligent design or God. Now, this reminds me of an episode of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Anybody know that one? Okay. There was a particular night when he had as a guest Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's an astrophysicist, and he's not a believer. And they switched roles. Neil deGrasse Tyson was hosting, and Stephen Colbert was being interviewed. And then Neil deGrasse Tyson, he starts talking to Stephen, and he asks him some questions. Then he pops a question that I don't think Stephen was expecting. He asked him a question about, after confirming that Stephen was a practicing Catholic, he asked him, "How did you resolve the urges of a believer to reject evidence in favor of faith?" How would you answer that question? No. Stephen countered with this: there is no urge to reject evidence. Faith and evidence are two different things. Faith approaches a mystery. And he goes on to say that his faith comes from a place to need to be grateful for the world and his own existence. He then challenges Tyson playfully, "Until you can tell me why there is something instead of nothing, I need a place to place my gratitude for my existence." He then went on to say he's thankful for Jesus, for by him all things were made, in the Christian tradition, according to John chapter 1. So I thought this answer was both simple and intelligent and respectful. The other thing that I really like is that these two are obviously very close friends, and they're still able to be friends even though they have very different points of view. Now for me, I personally have, I love science. Ever since I was a little kid, science was my best subject in school. I was a science teacher's pet. I loved everything about science. I worked half of my career before I was a pastor in a science-related field, and yet I still have faith. I have lots of questions, but I can still believe. Because in this world, there are some things that just cannot be explained. There is still mystery in the world. But when it comes to science, I like what Pastor Andy Stanley says: if we truly believe that God made the world and everything in it, then if science can actually prove anything, that's the way God made it. Science and faith do not have to conflict. And I think it's unhealthy for us to take a point of view that we have to check our mind at the door if we're going to follow Jesus. Because when it comes to science theories, well, it wasn't all that long ago that scientists had a theory that the world was flat and that the earth revolved around the sun, until it was proven that it didn't. So when it comes to Genesis chapter 1, how do we talk about it? Well, in order to talk about it, we really have to understand it more than just having read it. And I found a little video by the Bible Project that explains it in 7 minutes, better than any I've ever heard, or probably better than I could teach. So we're just going to watch that together now, okay? So hopefully you found that little video helpful. I found it tremendously helpful for me in understanding what Mila just read to us. Because there's a lot going on there that just reading it in English doesn't necessarily give us all the information we need to be able to tell this story. So we have to remember that the first page of the Bible in Genesis chapter 1 is not a scientific or a historical account of how the world came into being. It is a theological account of creation. So what is theology? Theology is the study of the divine, in our case, God. So the point in telling the creation story this way is to answer the question, why did God create the earth and humans? The purpose is not to determine how or when. I think the video sums it up beautifully. What John and Tim described there is that Genesis 1 is describing God's ideal vision for the whole cosmos, a place where God lives with his partners to rule the world in harmony forever. Let me read that again. Genesis 1 is describing God's ideal vision for the whole cosmos, a place where God lives with his partners to rule the world in harmony for how long? Anybody? Louder? Forever. Let that sink in there for a minute. Let's actually, Eliana, can you come and help me, please? I want to really help you understand this. Okay, I'm going to ask you to do something. I want you to stand on this table, okay? I would stand on the table too, but I'm not sure it would hold me. Okay, hold my arm. Okay? So get this picture in your mind. Why did God create the earth and humans? So that he could be present with us. God wants to be with us. Just like I'm with Eliana on this. You feeling nervous, sweetie? You're shaking. Does everybody get that? This is really important when we talk about the creation story. God made us and the world so that he could be present with us. Thank you, sweetie. I'll just help you get down. And here's a little something for your trouble. Who's going to help me get down? Okay. My knees aren't what they used to be. Okay. Got another helper, David. If you could stand up over there. So the first reason God made us is to be present with us. What do you think the second reason was? What does it say? God created us to be his partners, to share his authority, to rule the world in harmony for how long? Forever. Okay? Now, I've tried to come up with a way to demonstrate this. This is authority. Etienne thinks that's funny. Okay. So it says that God shares his authority. So when you're playing a game or playing catch with football, if I just keep the football to myself, or I I mean, does this ever happen to you when you were a kid? The kid that owned the ball made the rules, right? So if he said you can play for 2 minutes and then you got to give it to me, or I always get to be the quarterback, or I always get to be the center, or you get the idea, right? Okay, but to really have fun, we have to share. We have to play, right? So we're going to attempt to throw this and catch it, okay? All right. So, let's stay there. God is not a dictator. He does not just keep the authority all to himself. He wants to share it. But, just hold on to it. He's not absent either. If I just leave the football with David and there was just the two of us in the whole world, who's he going to play with? There isn't anybody left, right? This is just so much fun, I don't want to stop. Thanks, David. Got a little something for you too, if you want. No, okay. So I really want you to keep those two images in your mind. God wants to be present with us. He wants to share his authority to rule over the world. That's the earth. In harmony. For how long? I think sometimes we skip over this far too quickly because it's only like 1 page in the Bible or 2 pages in the Bible. And the rest of it we're going to deal with as we go through the series. But sometimes we skip over this part, what God's intention was. His intention was to be with us and rule the world with us in harmony for how long? Forever. So even though God created us from dirt, which signifies that we're mortal and that we would die, God made a way for us in the garden to live forever by eating from the tree of life. So that's what God's intentions were. That's a nice story, don't you think? That's not how most people view God or what we believe as followers of Jesus. Now, for the rest of us who are parents, the other closest example I can think of is being a parent. Two people love each other so much that they want to have a child. And I know some of you that have babies or toddlers, they can be difficult and you have to take care of them. Other of us here have teenagers and they're learning to be independent and they're frustrating. But what's the ultimate goal of having children? To have them grow up and become independent of you, but still connected to you in a relationship that is stronger than just friendship, family. They're an extension of you, yet different and independent of you. And that's why God made families, so we would have a picture of what God is like. And I can honestly say one of the greatest joys and also sadness in my life is the relationship I have or don't have with my adult children. That's creation, the first movement in the story. So what's next? Well, the next movement in God's story is called the fall. And typically people do the creation and fall together in one message because it's the first and second page of the Bible. But I really wanted to take the time today to really talk about just creation, what God intended. So obviously something happens to interrupt God's perfect vision for living with his partners to rule the world in harmony for how long? Forever. So we're going to take a look at what that was and the consequences of that next Sunday. So next Sunday, we're not meeting in person, but Pastor Jason and I will be doing a podcast. So make sure you listen to the podcast in between the weeks. Otherwise, you're going to miss out important parts of the story, okay? So creation is part of the context of the story that presents the circumstances that help us understand the whole story, including Jesus. Remember, for something to be good news, it has to create a change in the circumstances. So far, we're off to a pretty good start. God's ideal vision for the whole cosmos, a place where God lives with his partners to rule the world in harmony forever. And we're exploring this so we can have a working knowledge of God's story in the gospel so we can tell others why Jesus is such good news. Thank you.